The International Network for Democratic Economic Planning held its first ever in-person conference. It took place in Montreal in July 2025, and the Participatory Economy Project was there. We'll learn more about the conference and talk with PEP members who took part in this episode of PEP Talk.
Could you please tell us what you see as the alternative?
Hello, and welcome to PEP Talk, the Participatory Economy Podcast. The podcast where we discuss the democratic alternative to capitalism known as the participatory economy. I'm your host, Mitchell Szczepanczyk, coming from Chicago. I am joined by three folks on this call and on this podcast episode. From Helsinki, Finland, we're joined by Antti Jauhiainen, longtime advocate of the model of a participatory economy, researcher, PhD candidate. Antti, welcome.
Thank you.
Also joined by Anders Sandström, longtime advocate of the model of a participatory economy. He joins us from Stockholm, Sweden. He's the author of the book Anarchist Accounting. Anders, welcome.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Ferdia O'Driscoll. He is a member of the Participatory Economy Project and an independent researcher who works on post-capitalist models. He's joining us from Dublin, Ireland. Ferdia, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All four of us were participating in the first conference organized by INDEP, the International Network for Democratic Economic Planning, a conference that was held in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, in July 2025. The conference was called Democratic Economic Planning for the Real World. It was the very first conference organized by INDEP, as it's called. All the talks were recorded, and video presentations are available online on the website for INDEP, which is indep.network, INDEP.network. There were a lot of talks of the discussion. The presentations took place at the Palais de Congrès in Montreal. And I'd like to get, all of us had participated in the conference. And I'd like to we'll start off by asking what your general sense of the conference was. So take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to tell me what you thought of the conference. Antti, let's start with you, please.
Could I actually start first,
okay,
just to say some things about it? So just frame the discussion by saying some things about INDEP, because people might not know about INDEP listening. Okay, sorry to vault over the speaking order there. So just in case the listeners aren't familiar with INDEP, because I think that's important in its own right and it gives context. INDEP, as you said, is the International Network for Democratic Economic Planning, and it was founded in 2024, let's say roughly a year ago. Some more lead up into it. And it is a network of activists, researchers, students, workers, and people in general who are trying to advance a post-capitalist society based on democratic economic planning, which would encompass participatory economics, but also many other approaches. And this is the organization which organized the conference. And this is really important because before there was INDEP, there was no INDEP. So people were scattered around the world, working maybe in their own groups, many people as individuals. But through INDEP, we've brought together so many different people. And the whole point of that is to exchange information and to promote collaboration and create synergies, right? Synergies in advancing post-capitalism. And the conference was a really great example of that. It's not the only example. The conference was a really great example of that because it brought together researchers and mostly researchers and also activists from many different countries together to share their work on democratic economic planning. And it was, and I'll say a couple of things about the conference. I thought that it was a very strong conference. It was very well organized. by the crew from Quebec, over associated with CRITS, so the Center for Social Innovation. And there were a diversity of viewpoints, but what one of the things that a lot of people remarked on was that there was a lot of convergence on there was a lot of convergence in the things being said, and so I might stop there and let somebody else come in, and then I'll come back in and speak about the conference directly. But I just wanted to start by talking about INDEP. And sorry, the thing about INDEP as well is if people want to get involved more with INDEP, I do think this is really important. I think INDEP it's a really important development if we want to actually build and spread these ideas and change the world. So if people want to get involved with INDEP, and when I say get involved, you don't have to be a researcher yourself. If you are, that's good. If you're just interested, or if you're an activist, or you're interested in learning, or you want to connect with people, there's lots of different people who this appeals to. Then you can go to indep.network, indep.network. There's a newsletter, and there's also a forum and lots of other things, which will become apparent if you go to the website.
Thank you, Freddie. Antti, I was about to ask you what your thoughts were of the conference. Could you go ahead, please?
Yeah. Well, I participated as a social science researcher to the SASE conference, which the INDEP mini conference was part of. And my own PhD research is about learning and democratic participation, and also coincidentally about the importance of face-to-face interaction between people. And in that context, I think it was really sort of interesting and important to participate in this conference. As for INDEP, I tried to attend as many of the INDEP seminars as I could from my own sort of democracy track conference meetings or seminars. And I have to say I was quite astonished. Like Ferdia said, it's a hugely important development that INDEP is now sort of up and running. And it was wonderful to see the amount of participants on INDEP meetings, at least the ones I attended, as well as sort of the width and depth of the discussion. There's, like Ferdia said, there were many viewpoints, and there was probably the most sort of expert discussion on participatory economy I've seen in any place before. So it was hugely positive experience, and that's that. And then maybe I'll give Anders floor next.
Anders?
Yes. So this was the first academic conference that I attended. So it was sort of a new experience. I thought it was very well organized, like Ferdia said. I think perhaps the main benefit of a conference like this is the social aspects and the opportunity for people to meet in real life and connect and so on. I think that perhaps that is the most sort of beneficial part of a conference like this. I think that the discussions, I mean, since my approach or my special interest is the implementation of the participatory economy model in real life and in reality, I think most of the discussions were very academic from my point of view. They sort of addressed the academic issues that are there in models, but that is to be expected, of course. But yeah, so in general, I think it was a really good experience. I'll stop there.
I'll chime in as well. I had also participated. In fact, I think, except for one exception, I think I attended all the talks that were at the in-depth conference, and there were 4 days worth of talks that were going on. I thought it was astonishing that something like this could happen. And I'm very glad it did, especially where it's like I thought that the number of people who were like really serious advocates of democratic economic planning could maybe fill a small room. Instead, you had a whole conference with lots of presentations on lots of different perspectives over the course of 4 days. Simon Tremblay-Pépin, who was the main organizer of the conference, or at least seemed to me to be the main organizer of the conference, and owes a big debt of credit for helping to make this happen. And by his own admission, as he said right near the tail end of his conference, he actually gave the final presentation of the conference. He was not alone in making it happen. A lot of folks in Quebec and elsewhere were very busy in helping to make it happen, and we all owe them a big debt of gratitude. They were just a lot of people came together, gave lots of good discussions, lots of different perspectives, very cordial. There were, I don't think, very many very heated discussions, maybe none. But everyone was just like learning about things and seriously trying to find answers. And it was, I found that to be remarkable. And I really like that. And yeah, I hope the conference will happen again wherever. But yeah, I'm very fortunate that I got to be a part of it, and very fortunate that it happened. So that went well. Great. So now that we've discussed how we thought the conference went well, what would be maybe points of improvement for the conference? I'll pose this to everyone on the podcast. What do you think should have been done better, or could have been room for improvement? Any thoughts on that? I actually do have one suggestion on that score, which I'll chime in on. There's nothing that the conference per se would have done about this, but I was kind of hoping for more discussions of models. Of like models of democratic planning writ large. And I didn't feel like there were very many that kind of got into the heart of that. And I was a little disappointed about that. That's just kind of maybe unfortunate that maybe just the presentations themselves didn't didn't maybe necessarily focus on that as much. And I kind of was like, well, there are other models out there. Maybe like people should present them and, debate about them and discuss their respective strengths and weaknesses, and have a really good debate or discussion about that. And I didn't feel like, aside from the panel that Anders and I, along with Robin Hahnel, were a part of, which also Ferdy had chaired, there wasn't really much that kind of got into models. At least my impression about that. That's my thought, at least. Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, I can chime in briefly. As a early PhD researcher, I think INDEP is in a position that, and I mean the sort of research of democratic planning in general, that there's so much that needs to be researched. Like Anders had a great presentation on problems with participatory economy and what needs to be improved there. And I think I noticed some conferences had these, and actually my Democracy Track conference at the end we had a small workshop on this. I think some sort of like for early stage researchers, or those hoping to be, for example, PhD or planning, what their master's thesis would be about, how democratic planning could be implemented in their sort of studies or at their university. I know Rethinking Economics has done something like this in the UK. I think networking like that, most of the seminars I attended were sort of quite formal, old school style, that someone talks and then audience at the end has, little time to ask some questions. But I think some sort of like maybe a funding workshop or going around with, students who are working on their master's thesis could, or early PhD people could, brainstorm with people who are, more advanced sort of in their research about ideas for their studies and work. Something like this might be an improvement.
Before I hand off the floor to anyone else, it looks like we are joined by Robin Hahnel, co-inventor of the model of a participatory economy, who also participated in the conference in Montreal. Robin, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can hear us, I presume.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. That's okay. We're just getting started.
Okay.
We had a quick go around where people gave their impressions regarding the conference in Montreal. Could you take maybe a minute or two to give your very broad, general sense about what you thought about the conference?
First of all, sorry to join late. I was very, very pleasantly surprised by the conference up in Montreal. It exceeded my expectations pretty much in every way. And I just saw that as very good news for the community of people who are, working on desirable alternatives to capitalism. I thought it was a sign that the sort of intellectual level of discussion about alternatives to capitalism has really taken a step forward. And the other thing I thought that was very positive was that we had in some ways, we've left behind sort of the debating approach to different ideas that, we're learning from one another and recognizing, the contributions that various people have brought in a more comradely, friendly way, which I think means that going forward, we now see ourselves as working more as a team rather than as competitors with different visions. Mm-hmm. And even to the extent that we know we still have disagreements, the quality of the debate, it's being conducted less as a debate and more as a conversation. And I think that just bodes very, very well. So I was sort of blown away by the conference in all those ways.
I was asking the question. Also, it's just like all of us 201 agreed that the conference was a remarkable achievement and had a lot of positive things to say about it. I was getting into a little bit of the discussion about what could be improved, or where did you think that there should be, I don't know if you would say problems, but maybe opportunities for advancement or improvement. I had chimed in, Antti had chimed in, Ferdia, Anders, Robin, do any of you have thoughts about where you think things could be improved for another time? Any thoughts there?
Here's one thing I noticed. I didn't notice it at the time, but all of our panels were 3 participants with some discussion afterwards, which meant that presentations were confined to 20 minutes. In some ways, that's a lot more audience friendly and leads to more discussion. So sometimes that format's a good format. On the other hand, for no particular reason, I was sort of going on our website the other day, and I clicked on a presentation that I had made. I told Anders about this in Sweden, where I must have been able to talk. So I was the only one presenting, and I must have had about an hour to present. And then there were plenty of questions afterwards also. And I realized that, well, wow, in that format, you can really delve into things, and you can sort of go slowly enough to bring your audience along. And so in that regard, I simply thought, but that's a very minor thing, and that can be tweaked, and we can basically do combinations, of sessions at future gatherings where they are multi-presentations. The other thing is that in that regard, we had one presentation where it was 3 of us, talking about different aspects of our work. Right. Most of them were not of that nature. They were 3 separate presentations, that really were not necessarily, talking about the same thing. Doesn't have to be, it can be one conference does it one way and one conference does it a different way, but we're going to need a mixture of sort of length and how it is that, we continue to collaborate and work with one another and respond to one another's ideas and work going forward.
Ferdia, Anders, either of you want to chime in?
Well, I mean, I can just second what you said there, Mitchell. And also Robin touched on it too. I think I kind of like the focus on the model, like we presented our model and we focused on discussing a model, and I would have liked also, like you said there, Mitchell, to see more presentations of models. And I mean, and then from my perspective too, I would have liked to sort of see a bigger focus on implementing models in reality from other models as well. I'll stop there.
Brilliant.
I thought the conference was excellent. I thought that it was very high caliber. It was very serious, and it was just pretty much, every presentation was just excellent, one after the next. And also the quality of discussion was very good too. It was unfortunate that we couldn't have more. There were definitely sessions where hands were flying up, and it felt like we could only scratch the surface. To some extent, that's what the pub is for. Like Anders said about the chief virtue or benefit of these events is the social connectivity. I think probably that can't be helped. There's only so much time. But in terms of what could be improved, some panels could definitely be more coherent. I was involved with some of the planning of the panels and grouping things together, and it's tricky. It's tricky to try to, because you receive submissions that are all over the map, and then you have to try to find patterns. And also the thing is that people's presentation, sometimes it's not entirely clear what it is and so on, and people drop out and all this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, that's always something. But anyway, the other thing is the topics of talks. Just my own thoughts and what some other people have said, that there could have been more of so the title of the mini conference was Democratic Economic Planning in the Real World. And it could be argued that there could have been more of the in the real world aspect. Another is a kind of particular type would be more historical discussions of actual democratic economic planning experiments or systems. That's something that one person said. We could definitely have had a lot more. This is on the ecological crisis, I think. How can democratic economic planning prevent the ecological crisis and find a way forward for humanity? There wasn't a lot on that, given how pressing it is. And there could have been more on the international dimension of democratic economic planning and post-capitalism. The thing is, though, there's always so much to talk about. There really is so much to talk about. So you're never going to fit everything on the agenda that you want. The other thing is so we had a discussion, an in-depth event discussing this, and one of the things that was talked about a lot was diversity, the range of people who are presenting, and if you look at the presentations, overwhelmingly it was men, I think probably 90%. So that's definitely something that to work on. But that is a large topic which is under discussion, and it's something which pervades the space generally, not just the conference and so forth.
It was a conference of academics for the most part, and it had that flavor. You could say, well, hopefully that means it has some strengths as well as some weaknesses, but I think that there was a lot of attention being spent. There was a lot of attention on methodology and framing. And I think that's why Anders' reaction was, well, what about just actual concrete proposals? And let's talk about them. So there was sort of more of the former and less of the latter. And I think that's partly the nature of the beast. I mean, this was part of the Canadian social science academic, overall gathering. And there are other gatherings that will be more of activists rather than academics. But I mean, I think we're well suited to participate in both types of venues, and hopefully we'll be able to do that over the years. You could say it's a weakness of this conference. On the other hand, well, no. I mean, it depends on. It's not a weakness if it's part of a group of conferences and gatherings going forward over the next 5 years, where there are other ones that are more of that other nature, that are less academic. I mean, a lot of these were, people presenting things that were of value to their academic careers for promotions and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's the way that academic conferences work.
So I gave 2 presentations, which Simone just said was very modest, and they were on planning. And I'll put my hand up and say that was a methodology talk through and through. And the other one was on psychology. So the first one was titled "Beyond the Misconception of Socialism as a Planned Economy," and it was interrogating this idea of a planned economy, and what is that, and what is its relationship to socialism. And mostly, I was just asking a lot of questions, and what do we mean by planning? It's a very broad term which encompasses many different ideas. It is obviously a central concept within the discourse and the community. In-depth International Network for Democratic Economic Planning. However, people mean different things by it. And so I was just talking about that and what are the implications of that. And how we could be led astray if we don't exercise kind of meticulous discipline in defining what that is and clarifying it. And then, so that's something that I find important, but it does take away from looking at more concrete examples and proposals. And I think there's always a balance between the two, because if you don't have the concrete, then what are we doing? Because ultimately, we're not just talking, right? We're trying to change the world, make a better planet, better world. But if we don't have the correct methodology, we will waste our time or end up with poor results. And then the other talk was about, it's called Understanding Rewards in Socialism Through Self-Determination Theory. And that was applying the psychological science of self-determination theory, which is the leading theory of psychological theory of motivation and well-being, to the specific case, the specific problem of compensation and work motivation in a post-capitalist society. Answering questions like, should people be paid for their work, or should people all receive a universal unconditional basic income, for example? What are the implications there for motivation? And what can psychological science say? And if people are paid, how should they be, and so forth? But I only really had time to just sketch out the broad outlines of SDT and then throw it open for questions. So that's what I presented. And I'll say that the last thing is, in that presentation, I threw out the line that this theory, psychological theory, has won the human nature debate for socialism, but we haven't realized it. And hopefully this causes the listener to prick up their ears, because I think it's true. This is a debate that's been raging for centuries now, really. And I believe that it has come to a point now where we can make some real definitive statements based on advanced science that socialism is compatible with human nature and capitalism isn't. Although the debate still continues because you can still contest that. So anyway, pass it on to somebody else.
Yeah, maybe Robin goes next. Robin, what did you talk about?
Well, that would require me to remember what I talked about. And I don't remember. One of my problems is after I give a talk, I also have absolutely no impression. I have no sense at all about whether it was effective or it wasn't effective. But I mean, I was handed the job of doing, in some sense, an overview of the major high points of our own proposal. And so I did talk about how I tried to explain the ways in which our proposals about annual planning are truly unique in the planning literature, that we have proposed something that really is quite distinctive. What everybody else who's bothered to try and explain in any sort of concrete detail how they think you should carry out comprehensive economic planning. So I talked about that. I talked about the unique feature and why I thought that was important, why I thought it was an important contribution. I know that I also mistimed what 20 minutes can, what you can cram into 20 minutes, because I had to delete an entire section where I was talking about our, very concrete proposals about how to organize reproductive labor. There wasn't time for it. I hadn't left myself time. That was sort of a mistake of timing. That was sort of my task on our panel, where there were three of us all speaking about different aspects of our work on the participatory economy proposals and model. And I do think that it was wise to have me go first in our panel to sort of give an overview of things that we have said that we think are important and particularly important and still believe so over the years, as an introduction to sort of some very specific things that, that Mitchell and Anders then went on to sort of elaborate on where we were taking our work, and recent things that we had managed to contribute.
Antti, what did you present?
Yeah, I present my social studies research on informal learning and face-to-face meetings in bars and cafes, so not directly related to participatory economy for sure, or even democratic planning. Although I might say that in a really functioning advanced democratic economy, we would really need different systems of power polity, for example, what Steve Shalom calls, and citizen assemblies, and around them probably some form of informal network of public discussion, which is what I research in our current society. So I think there's definitely a sort of bridge there between what I currently research. But yeah, I'm not gonna go yet what was my favorite, because it's kind of funny because I was just an audience member and all four of you were presenting, so I'm gonna withhold my judgment on who was best.
Anders, tell us about your presentation.
I talked about the participatory economy model from my perspective, and my background is in accounting, and which is quite different from economics. The focus of an accountant is detail, and it's very, very concrete. So I basically, if I go back to where I started to think about these things, I fairly early on came to think that the model, the model as it is presented is the best sort of model there. But as just as early, I started to think about the gaps between the model and the reality and the implementation of it. And that's one of my specific interests, generally speaking. Going back to my college years, I think that the next focus should be to think more about those practicalities and the problems that arise when you try to move from an abstract and generalized model into a real world setting. And that's what I talked about. There are so many things to address in that area, but I focused in my talk on the problems with the huge amount of goods and services that are produced and consumed in an economy, and how do you deal with that in a future participatory economy, and then also to think about the need for coordination and collective work outside of the annual planning procedure, because sometimes when you look at the model, you get the impression that basically everything is happening in the annual planning, but there are so many other things that needs to be there, and there are so many other things that needs to happen outside of that. So that was my talk.
And I gave two presentations, one of which was part of the panel that Robin had alluded to, where I was in the middle between the presentation that Robin began and that Anders concluded, a whole panel regarding participatory economics in the real world, as the panel was called. Here it was the result of new research that we had done using the computerized program PQuad that we've been using as a basis for testing out aspects of a participatory economy using computerized simulations. Here it was addressing, or at least starting to address, a matter where involving, as was mentioned before, the environmental impacts of a participatory economy. We'd actually baked into the model pollutants and saw what impacts would a model have with regards to the environmental impacts using pollutants as a measure of that. We found two things with the very earliest preliminary results that we had. One was that the number of iterations of a participatory economy seems to have worsened when you bring in pollutants. I think this is still tentative and still needs more research, and also there could be more room for improvement. It could be that that could have been the result of some implementation flaw, or could be remedied by some improvement in the code that I make. So that's actually, I think, still an open question. One thing we did also discover was that the economy handled a pollutant like a good economy should. The cost of a pollutant went sky high, super expensive, which you would want for an economy that, is responsive to the environment. Supplies were low and demands were low. Also, what a good economy should do. And so it actually was a reaffirming aspect of the model that it actually showed this. So I was very heartened by that. And also spoke to the needs for a lot more research onto this that we're hoping to do in the coming months and years. Second presentation I gave actually was the very first in-person presentation for the whole conference, where I and one of our colleagues at the Participatory Economy Project, Jason Chrysostomo, have been working along with a number of others in PEP, the work for a way for individuals to be able to interact with the model, what we're referring to as the Participatory Planning Interactive Prototype, or PPIP for short. And so we basically gave a presentation on the progress report of how that's coming along, the needs for it, what it intends to do, where we stand on things, and where we hope to go in the future. So that was my presentations, plural. And also just like continuing up, and maybe with an eye to wrapping up, what were your favorite parts of the conference that were not yours? So talk about something else.
Should I start and reveal my preference?
Yes, please.
Well, actually, of course, there were several. Shout out to actually Juliet Shore, who presented on 4-Day Work Week on another seminar there. I found that really interesting, and she has she's done a lot of work on that topic. But maybe I'd give two interesting things. One was that I really liked Anders' style of presentation, and Anders talked about the real world problems, and it's sort of personally wonderful to see that, because I think one of the first times I met Anders was in 2011, and he came to Helsinki and we had a meeting on participatory economy. And I remember already way back then that Anders was presenting this huge list that Swedish industries have categorized all different parts of industry that you need in order to produce products. And I remember thinking, I really realized then that it's like, talking about actually functioning democratic economies requires that kind of detail, whichever way you sort of make it. And I was accustomed more to, talking about values or how do we view money and what does it mean to us or something like this, which are all hugely important, aspects of it. But I think just accompany that stuff so well that it's hugely important. But the one presentation that really tickled my brain and that I really liked and has stayed with me is Ferdia's about socialism as not a planned economy, because it really gave me a thought that oftentimes planned economies are talked about, that they're very specific, and North Korea is a planned economy, or whether one part of some thing is planned economy or not. And then free market, on the other hand, is given this leeway that free market is something that has existed since the dawn of man, that wherever we go, we market freely. I don't know, but exchange stuff, and that's just what happens. But what I started to think sort of that they're both right, and it's a terrible sleight of hand to give sort of the so-called free market that advantage, which basically is just, I think, exchange of stuff, and is different from free market and especially from capitalism. And on the other hand, you can just as easily say that wherever humans have ever walked or done anything, it's psychologically basically one of our core strengths is to plan something, that we can plan how we hunt an animal, or we can plan how we are going to utilize the berries or resources that the village has. And all that has developed, throughout millennia into what we have now. And, there's no capitalism without planning, obviously. All, huge companies do a lot of planning. Apple, for example, did a really clever trick with planning when they introduced iPod. They already knew they're going to build the iPhone, and they built the iPod in order to have huge deals on flash chips, which they knew they're going to need for their phones. And then they got really great deals for those memory chips beforehand. Everyone knew that they're going to build the actual phones. And they planned all this in advance. So, I mean, and it's something that any successful company basically has to do. So I think that was just something it's terrible that it's, attached in that sort of what's going to disparaging way to socialism, etc. And it's also something that I think, any advocate of, capitalism, free market should sort of maybe think a bit more that, planning is something we need, and, finding out ways to do planning is something we need. And then if you're the kind of person who likes democracy, then, it starts to, maybe we need democratic kind of planning. So I mean, I don't know, it was interesting, and yeah, but that's something that I'm still thinking about. But great presentations, a lot of them. Basically any presentation I went to was good. So it was really sort of high-level conference, I think.
Anders, Ferdia, Robin, favorite presentations?
Yeah, two observations. One was that there are distinct models out there, but in some ways, I'm sort of pleased because I think it worked out well for us. But in some ways, it was sort of there were missing people on the stage. that, I mean, we have a concrete proposal. Cockshott and Cottrell do, but they weren't presenting. They weren't there and presenting. Dan Saros does, but he wasn't there presenting. David Laban does, but he wasn't there presenting. So in some sense, the only really concrete model that was present at the conference and various parts of it were being presented was us. And I could say, well, in some ways, I feel great. Let's take a victory lap. On the other hand, out there in the big world, it isn't really that way. So in some sense, that was too bad. I very much appreciated the opportunity to interact with. So the only other model that was presented was the divine the divine Adaman model now. And since I've interacted with the two of them for so many years, I was very happy that at this conference, it's been a long time since we've been in each, have actually visited in person. And I sat down with the two of them on 3 different occasions for probably a total of almost 4 hours. And I thought that not that we really resolved what we disagree about, but at least we came to a comradely understanding of where all that lay. And we're reaffirming all the commonalities that we have. So that was a very valuable part of the conference for me. The other thing that keeps striking me is, in my own mind, there's part of what we've presented that's been out there for decades. And we've gotten tremendous amounts of feedback about it. But investment planning and different kinds of long-term development planning are things that we've thrown out a bunch of ideas and very concrete suggestions about how to organize those kinds of planning, in a particular way rather than a different way. And once again, I'm just disappointed that we really have never gotten any critical feedback about that. I think partly it's that people still haven't wrapped their minds around it. When I go to conferences, one of my purposes is looking for constructive, useful, and it can be critical, feedback on things. And on part of our work, been hearing all that, for decades. But for now, what I consider to be an important part of the work, we really have never received any feedback. And once again, that didn't happen at this conference. I don't know when it will or when it won't. But just as I think we've made proposals in other areas that are different from, and I believe superior to what other people have come up with, I think we've done that in this area also. But really haven't heard back from, the people working in this field about any of our sort of specific proposals about the unique problems that investment development planning raise, and therefore what is a better or worse solution for those things.
Anders, for you?
For me, not being an academic, really, I have to admit that a lot of presentations really, I struggle to see the point, that maybe I didn't even understand many of them. So one of the presentations I did understand and I agree with is Ferdia's presentation on SDT. So I'd say that would be my choice for a presentation not being my own that I liked. So yeah, I'll stop there.
For me, I count whether or not a presentation was successful as if I keep thinking about it and the points that it raised, even well after the conference had ended. And for me, I think there were 2 presentations that kind of did that. One was actually the presentation that Anders gave. Turns out that even though I had seen part of the points that you had raised, at a previous meeting that we had held a couple of years ago. Rethinking those points, I think, has really left an impact on me. And so my compliments to you, Anders, for that presentation. The second one was a presentation, gentleman who I'm looking up with, Andrew, blanking on his name at the moment, and I'm looking him up.
Andrew Reeves, was it?
Thank you, Andrew Reeves. Yeah, he gave a presentation regarding the environment and economic planning more broadly. But yeah, I liked his presentation as well. It also, especially the way he kind of tried to tie in various disparate threads. I really thought that was a very impactful presentation as well. And I kept thinking about that over and over again as well after the conference. So yeah, those are my choices. Ferdia?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I suppose many things I was familiar with. And so, for example, I'm familiar with all of the participatory economy stuff from the inside, although I wasn't up to date on the pollutant simulations. So it was interesting to hear about that, what exactly had happened with that, the work that you, Mitchell, and Robin have been doing. But of course, I thought Anders' presentation was very good. We're working together very closely, so this is like oxygen for me at this stage. But yeah, no, it's very good and needs to be done. But a lot of things. I didn't see anything that shifted my perspective drastically or anything like that. But it was more refining lines of thinking and just making some interesting points or raising some questions. Just off the top of my head, some things which I enjoyed were, I suppose they're related to things that I'm working on or have been working on a lot. So, for example, Tom O'Brien's presentation, who presented just before me about what was it, planning versus political economy, and there was massive resonance between his presentation, the one that I gave on planning, making similar points. He's making an argument from more of a Marxist perspective, but making this argument that political economy is the most important factor or idea when we are developing proposals for socialism, and it's that when you get the political economy right, the planning comes out of it naturally, as it were. And I like that, but also I work closely with Tom, so I basically knew what he's going to say before it happened. Then some other things, I found Christoph Zorg's presentation on planning, that was also part of that panel, to be very interesting, because it just I just thought that he did some really interesting scholarship on different ways of thinking about planning and who had said what, and the different ways of thinking about it that I found very useful, just because I've been thinking about this a lot. So I found that helpful. I thought that Pablo Parieda's from presentation, so from Sibcom, was, if I got his name correct there, was also very nice, hitting a lot of things that I think are very important. So about cybernetics, for one. So the viable system model, if any listeners know about that, it's a way of understanding any kind of organization or entity which is able to reproduce itself sustainably and adapt. And also talking about supply chains and lean production. So lean production being, for people who don't know, being the most advanced form of manufacturing, and I would say production in general in capitalism, presently pioneered by Toyota. and combining those two things, and then also bringing in labor time accounting. So I thought that was a very nice little synthesis of some really important ideas, I thought. And there's loads of other stuff. I mean, I don't know if we have time. I could say one more thing, like, which was Simon Suterlutti's presentation on the GDR, okay, so on East Germany, and the problems arising therein. And he gave this argument that basically that the thing that we're trying to create, socialism, he was arguing that the core problem which arose is that there was effectively a form of wage labor because people were getting paid. There was a compulsion to work because people had to work in order to be paid. And I thought that resonated a lot with thinking that I've done and things I've read from Yanis Kornai about these systems and the importance of autonomous motivation from an SDT perspective. I don't know if I fully agree with him in the end, but there were a lot of really interesting discussions which arose from that. And this issue of, like, for me, one of the things I end up talking about over and over and over in Montreal was about this idea of compulsion to work. Should people be paid or not? And discussing that with lots of people. So that stood out to me, and I'm still chewing on that.
I guess we will wrap up the show. We'll take a moment to go around and take maybe like a minute or so to give us your final thoughts regarding the conference and anything that should have been said that was unsaid. We'll start with Antti.
The experience was great. Another thing maybe is that I've been to some activist conferences, etc. But I think, especially when you're talking about, planned economies, I think there is a real benefit to doing it in an academic style. And it's something maybe to think about on these topics, that especially like Ferdia mentioned, that we sort of have an urgent need for solutions to climate crisis as well as democracy. And I mean, the academy is a sort of a existing framework where there is actually, resources and, people are working actively on stuff. And maybe activism is better suited to sort of some reactionary efforts on, for example, currently Palestine and Gaza, to, really highlight that and the kind of future-oriented stuff that democratic planning is about. I'm not saying they're exclusive, but I just really felt that there's real sort of nuance and benefit to having it in that context, which I haven't seen that much. So that was nice. And then also for conferences, I think the face-to-face aspect of it is just, you can't, step aside that. And it's important for people to actually meet and discuss these topics in both in the conference, in the seminar, but also, afterwards when they're walking out or in the evening when they meet and so on. I think it gives just something extra for your brain and from the interaction that is important for developing these thoughts further.
Anders, why don't you go next?
I don't really have anything much to add. I think the experience was really good, and I don't really have anything more.
Okay, Ferdia?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things quickly. So it was a pleasure to see you all there in person. There's really no substitute for meeting in person. The internet is such a gift, but it's great to have that. So to see you all there and to see lots of other people as well. And it's a very important for, I think, forging and sustaining these bonds that I think are crucial in doing something as monumental as trying to create a new, free, democratic global civilization, which is what we're trying to do. It's a daunting task. And so the only way that we can really do this isn't as individuals, but it's as comrades, as colleagues, as friends. And so that's really, really important, that human dimension to keep in view. And just, and so whether you're working on this as a researcher or whether you're an activist or whatever, it's so important to have that and not be isolated, because that's the thing. You can feel like you're isolated, but you're not actually. You know, there are millions of us around the world trying to do this in one form or another, and you're not alone. The other thing I want to say is, it's really important. You know, I agree with Antti. You know, academia, or not, let's say not just academia, but strictly kind of formal academia, although that does have its place as well. But let's say that academic level of discussion, that academic level of work, it's really important, right? It's part of an ecosystem of work, and activist conferences and more popular publications and discussion and things like that, absolutely crucial. I think they're complementary, and the point should be to try to get them to help each other to enhance those complementarities, to speak in an overly academic way. But yeah, what it shows is, just in terms of what's the significance of it. The significance of it is that we're not just looking from a global perspective. We're not just kind of a bunch of people with some ideals and some ideas. We'd like to change the world. You know, maybe we have some half-baked opinions. No, we're talking about serious intellectual powerhouses, really serious people working on this, making progress, and something that should be taken seriously. And the last thing, and this is to close, is just to remind people again about INDEP. Okay, INDEP, International Network for Democratic Economic Planning. Check it out. There's talks, and if you want to follow, there, you know, articles are shared and all sorts of things you want to see about that, indep.network. Follow the newsletter, etc., etc., etc. Thank you.
Robin.
Yeah, one thing that, I mean, there's another conference that's going to happen in Vienna that one of the things that was noticeable about this one was who was there and who wasn't. And there was very strong Canadian presence. And there was a European presence. There was not, I mean, there was much less, you know, U.S. presence at the conference. And part of that, I think, is a reflection of where it is that this whole debate is still alive and healthy, and where it is less so. That in Canada and Europe, this is an increasingly, you know, live issue. And for various reasons in the United States, it's probably less so, at least temporarily. But I do think that, and there is a conference that's going to happen in Vienna. I'll be curious in what ways it's different and similar to this one. And various, I mean, Thomas is going to be at that. Jason, I think, Anders, you are also, aren't you?
No, Jason and Chris are going.
Right. So it's different people from our group who are going to be present at that. I'll be curious in what ways that compares to this one.
Once again, we've been talking about the very first INDEP conference, the International Network for Democratic Economic Planning, the presentation of Democratic Economic Planning for the Real World as part of the SASE 2025 conference in early July 2025 in Montreal, Quebec, at the Palais des Congrès de Montreal. The website for INDEP, once again, is indep.network, INDEP. Sign up for a newsletter, sign into the database, join in, and take part in a very lively and active community. This has been PEP Talk, the Participatory Economy Podcast where we discuss the democratic alternative to capitalism known as the participatory economy. To find out more and to contribute, you can go to the website of PEP, which is participatoryeconomy.org. There you can join in an online forum to discuss more, and you can also sign up to a quarterly newsletter to find out developments regarding the Participatory Economy Podcast. On behalf of Anders, Antti, Ferdia, and Robin, this is Mitchell. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Goodbye.
Could you please tell us what you see as the alternative?
Self-management, democratic control of communities or workplaces, federal arrangement.
Participatory democratic planning.
Jobs to have a mix of empowered work, vested councils, linked to one another. Everyone gets to participate in a primary council.
Please visit participatory-economy.org to find out more and subscribe to our newsletter. And don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks, and see you at the next episode.